So I'm a pretty patient person, and one of my criteria for a good Souls-like is how fast it can reduce me to blood-boiling rage while I yell profanities at my computer screen. And after playing Lies of P, yeah, it's pretty good. Now, before I start, I want to clarify I have very little experience playing Bloodborne, which I know is almost certainly blasphemy in the Souls community since it's widely considered one of its best entries, but I could never justify buying a console just to play one game, so keep that in mind during this review. And with that out of the way, let's find out how good this game really is. However, before I start, if you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, it would really help out. So, set in the city of Krut, you wake up in an abandoned train station overrun by evil mechanical puppets. And after fighting your way out, it's explained that Geppetto built these puppets to help society, but have since fallen into a so-called puppet frenzy, and instead of helping humans, have decided to murder them. Your mission is to uncover the root of this frenzy and save the city, although since this has heavy Soulsborne inspiration, you probably get a good idea of the atmosphere you're in for. This is by no means Disney's version of Pinocchio. Almost everything is gloomy, dark, run-down, pissing with rain and full of dead bodies, and Krat itself actually gives me strong vampire vibes if you ever played that game. With both being set in plague-ridden Victorian cities that you have to do something about, only this time it's evil puppets, not vampires. And yes, I'm aware that Vampire was likely influenced by a certain FromSoft game as well, but it's different in the sense that the narrative is much more straightforward, and you have a clear idea of the story more or less the entire time. Now, something I really like here was their change to the idea of Pinocchio, apart from the fact he's now a violent murderer. Since while they've kept the idea of becoming a real boy, it's the act of lying that turns you human. A change I genuinely really like. As you progress, you'll be faced with multiple dialogue options, normally during NPC questlines, where you can act like a puppet or choose to lie, with the latter changing your appearance and affecting the ending. A good example of this is a woman suffering from the petrification disease, a mysterious illness that's been blinding and killing what remains of the human population. Oh, and turning them into violent rampaging zombies, that as well. Her dying wish is for you to find her child, to see her one more time before going blind. However, upon reaching the child's location, you discover only puppets. What you choose to tell her is entirely your decision, that it really is her daughter or she's holding a charred doll. And the game is full of these kind of quests. So admittedly, while it's not the most original story as it's clearly taking from an established format, it's good enough to keep you interested, especially with the solid voice acting. Now, for anyone who's played a FromSoft game before, this is going to feel incredibly familiar. You've got the hub area, in this case the Krat Hotel, a firekeeper for levelling up, checkpoints called Stargazers, Ergo, the game's equivalent of souls or runes, and pulse charges to regain health. You also have all manner of throwables, consumables, amulets, and varying levels of upgrade materials that are used to improve your weapons at the blacksmith. They even have their own version of crystal lizards, in this case butterflies, which drop special materials to upgrade boss weapons. And all of this, like I said, feels remarkably similar to the Souls series, to the point where it's the closest thing you're going to get to a FromSoft game without playing a FromSoft game. Even the incredibly well done maps have multiple shortcuts, and feature sections that are almost certainly going to bring back a lot of memories. For example, an homage to Sen's Fortress complete with the boulder to fuck your day up, the rafters from Anor Londo, Blighttown, and of course the quintessential Poison Swamp. Now, it's worth noting this is by no means me trying to rag on the game, since while it's undeniably similar to the Souls series, it's by no means a one-for-one remake, just with Pinocchio. It clearly has its own distinctive style, and I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a fair share of differences. Firstly, on top of the standard levelling system, you also have what the game calls the P organ, and before you ask, yes, that's actually what it's called, and no, it's not what you think it is. Despite its unfortunate naming, this is actually Pinocchio's heart, and features a skill tree that can be upgraded with quartz. This includes all manner of upgrades, such as increasing the damage from backstabs and criticals, or increasing your number of amulet slots. However, if we're talking real differences, it's the combat itself where it starts to become something else. Overall, it feels immensely satisfying, and while it draws inspiration from Bloodborne, it's much more of a Bloodborne Sekiro hybrid, consisting of not only dodging, but a heavy focus on blocking enemy attacks to break posture and setting up for criticals when health glows white. See, while regular blocking does work, it results in chip damage that can be recovered with further attacks. Although by perfect blocking, you'll not only avoid all damage, but stack enemy posture much faster than you would by simply hitting them. You can even break their weapon by doing this to make them less of a threat. Certain enemies even have what are called Fury attacks, and these can only be done perfectly, and due to the tight parry windows and many delayed attacks, you're going to be on the receiving end of these a fair amount of times. However, the good news is, if you ever run out of pulse charges, you can replenish one by hitting enemies. This means fights are never completely hopeless so long as you stay on the offensive. Now, an entirely original feature is this game's weapon system, since while they do have very Souls-like attacks, including special moves called Fable Arts, the way you customize them is something else entirely. Each weapon has two main parts, the blade and the handle. The handle decides the moveset, while the blade determines the damage and the Fable Art. These can be separated and mixed to create various combinations, regardless of how goofy they look. It's also worth noting that unlike blades, handles don't require upgrades. This means if you ever grow tired of your current setup and want to try something new, you can easily pair your blade with a new handle, getting an entirely new moveset, all without using precious upgrade materials. Additionally, even if what you've created doesn't scale to your build, you have the option of using cranks to forcibly adjust its scaling, meaning your wrench head on a sword hilt can actually be a viable option. Although keep in mind these are a fairly limited resource, so maybe don't do that. The only exception to this extensive customization is the boss weapons, but they make up for that by just being insanely good regardless. You can even test weapons in the training area located directly next to the blacksmith, which is incredibly convenient. So moving on, I'd like to talk about another unique mechanic, the weapon durability system. During fights, this will gradually go down, causing your weapon to do less and less damage, and eventually become nothing more than a wet noodle. As such, you'll need to keep using the grinder tool to stop this happening. Now, when I played the demo for this game, I really didn't like this feature. I thought it was annoying since having to repair your weapon too often would be a pain in the arse. However, after playing the full version, it's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Granted, it's still not perfect, but it doesn't get in the way nearly as much as I thought it would, and you do often have enough downtime to repair your weapons. Additionally, incorporating the buffs themselves into the grinders was actually pretty clever, so while it's not a mechanic I'm overly sold on, it doesn't detract from the game. So on top of your more standard weapons, you also have the Legion Arm, a Sekiro-esque prosthetic that can be swapped out to access new abilities. These include a flamethrower, a taser, a grappling hook, an explosive shield, a cannon, and a few others I didn't really use. This naturally comes with several upgrades, although you'll find yourself changing this far more often, since these abilities are exceptionally good at targeting specific enemy weaknesses. Something you'll find useful since the enemy variety is extensive. Each area features a number of foes typically broken down into 3 classes. These consist of puppets, the zombie-like victims of the petrification disease, and humans, in this case animal-themed stalkers. Within those classes you have all manner of basic enemies, insanely hard elite variants, giant mutated monsters, and dogs, except this time they explode. I was already impressed with the enemy variety in the demo, and now I've played the full game, I'm even more impressed. What's great is the placement of these enemies never feels unfair or artificially difficult, so when you get your ass handed to you by a mob, it's 100% your fault. So great bosses are pretty much the backbone of this genre, and I'm happy to report that Lies of P does a fantastic job. Mostly, anyway. There's a few I didn't like, but that's to be expected. There's bound to be a Capra demon or two somewhere in there. As a whole, they've really hit the nail on the head, with basically all these fights being absolutely amazing. From the designs, the cutscenes, the music, oh, and the difficulty. Just eye-watering levels of difficulty. I know hitting a wall is a pretty common thing in these games, but in this it happens so much more frequently. See, despite having elements of Sekiro, the fights themselves are far more focused on muscle memory than just dodging and or parrying, with attacks often having such a quick wind up you aren't going to be able to avoid them the first time around, even if you are a parry god. In most cases it's going to take a fair few tries, or in my case even more than a fair few tries, just to learn each move and how to deal with them, especially given how strict the parry windows are. And this may sound like a chore, but it really isn't. Once you've cracked it, the fights become a blast to do, and going back and forth with bosses, flawlessly parrying their combos pretty much instinctively becomes incredibly satisfying. I should mention this goes for every boss, so each one is a brand new experience you have to adapt to. Now, admittedly, not all the bosses feel like this, and there are some I just didn't enjoy. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood fights, for example, are pretty bad. Oh, and fuck the mad clown puppet. Genuinely, screw this boss and his bullshit unreadable attacks, I had to resort to cheesing him, and when another one showed up, even with my upgraded gear, he kicked my ass again. So yeah, fuck him. On top of that, the Stalker bosses, while by no means bad, just aren't as interesting compared to the others. They're also highly exploitable to strafing backstabs, which makes most of them much less entertaining. Now, it's worth mentioning that if you are really struggling with a boss, you have access to a Spectre that can be summoned outside the boss room, and what's nice is there's actually much more to it than simply drawing boss aggro. Granted, that is what most people are going to use it for, but using what the game calls wish stones, you can heal them mid-fight should they take too much damage, or add elemental buffs to capitalise on weaknesses, for example fire or acid. I did try my best not to use the Spectre, and ironically ended up not using it most of the time, since I'd simply run out of what's needed to summon it and get bored of grinding more. Also, while not technically a boss mechanic, throwables are insanely useful, to the point of basically being easy mode. They will melt the health of even the toughest bosses, and when paired with the Spectre for aggro, will cut the difficulty of these fights down to a fraction of what they normally are. I think I resorted to this like 3 times, once for that dancing clown fucker, and twice for the Black Rabbit fights. But overall, if you want the most out of them, I do not recommend this strategy. So overall, I cannot stress enough how much I enjoyed this game, and it's far more than just a Bloodborne Sekiro ripoff. The fact this is NeoWiz's first Souls-like is insane, because they've done such a good job. Like I said, it's the closest thing to a FromSoft game without playing a FromSoft game. The story, the graphics, the combat, it's all fantastic. And on top of that, I saw a grand total of 2 bugs. 2 in over 60 hours of gameplay. I should also add, the final scene has a teaser to Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, which implies a Souls-like fairy tale game universe, an idea I'm 100% on board with if it's anything as good as this. So yeah, long story short, if you're a fan of the Souls series, get this game, it's phenomenal. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.